Okay, I'm going to warn you though. I'm not going to be here to make you happy tonight. Okay? I'm here to tell you things you need to know about your state. And why is that important to us? Because Texas should be leading the nation. Don't you believe that? I do. I am proud to be a native Texan. And I'm the only native Texan in my family. I was born when my dad was in basic training in Fort Hood. So there's something about me. My dad said, you know what? It's got to be what makes you so hard-headed. Being the only native Texan in my family. Before I get started tonight, I want to ask you, how many veterans do we have here, or spouses of veterans? Raise your hands. Thank you. I can tell you that on days when my back hurts and I'm tired of taking my luggage out of my pickup truck and dragging it into one more hotel, I think of you. I think of our veterans that have actually given so much and are still giving so much to our country for the great cause of liberty, so I can get out and do my part. And I want to encourage you all to do the very same thing. Now, before I get into the presentation, I'm going to tell you about a report I would like very much for you to read. Because my friends at DPS, Department of Public Safety, would probably be disappointed if I did not take the occasion to tell you about some very good reports that they have on their website. Can you all hear me okay? If you go to the Department of Public Safety's website, you will see, need to talk louder? Okay. You will see 3 very important reports that you and your local officials and your state officials need to be very aware of. So if you just go to the Department of Public Safety website, and also Grassroots America has links on our website, you're going to find 3 very important reports. One was posted in 2013, and it is an unclassified version of a report that tells you that the cartels, 6 of the 8 most dangerous cartels in the world, are running all over the state of Texas and have set up elaborate, very sophisticated networks of organized crime with transnational gangs. And if you look at Smith County, my county, and Gregg County on the map, included in the DPS reports, you will find that we have the same level of cartel and transnational gang activity in our county as do the metro areas, the Dallas-Fort Worth area, Houston, and some of the border counties. Now I will tell you that when I read that first report in 2013, the question that kept coming up in my mind over and over is, how did we get here? How did we get here, folks? We've had Republicans holding statewide office for almost 20 years. For almost 20 years. How did we get to the point where then in 2014, in April of this year, there's a gang assessment report. And I would invite you to look at that report and look at the different cartels that are at work in Gregg County. Why do you need to know that? Well, for your personal safety. A third report will talk to you about human trafficking. That is modern-day slavery. And we have plenty of cartels and gang members and even American citizens that are making quite a bit of money transporting women and children over the border, even preying on foster children in our schools and selling them as cheap labor and into sexual slavery. I would invite you to learn about this because I will tell you that your law enforcement faces incredible challenges. I've been to the border, and I'll be happy to take some questions. I work very closely with law enforcement, and they have my highest respect. So I would ask you to please go to the DPS website and become familiar with that. I will tell you that the Department of Public Safety is happy to bring speakers to you. I have Lieutenant Jimmy Jackson that's over the patrol in East Texas, has been very good in helping me get speakers, and I would love to help you get some speakers because these are things that you all need to know. All right, let me see if we can talk a little bit about our state government. And I'm going to try to navigate this so that I can kind of look at what we're doing. The slide here tells you really what's on my mind tonight, and I think probably by now, and I'm part of the Life, Liberty, and Property Tour, and we will be with you all on October the 18th. But the Life, Liberty, and Property Tour is a group of statewide conservative leaders that are going around the state talking about what actually happens in Austin. Because we found all over the state that some of our state officials don't tell you the truth about that. And you know, it has everything to do with what they're selling to us at election time. How many people know that everybody that runs as a Republican in Texas runs as a conservative? That's right, they're all conservative. They all love the Second Amendment. They're all pro-life. They're all just as fiscally conservative as possible, and they would not waste a dime of your money. Well, see, this is where truth in advertising should kick in, because often the packaging that we get during campaign season is not actually what they do when they get in office. So, my title here, Texafornia Closer Than You Think, proof that a straight Republican ticket doesn't guarantee conservative limited government.
That's a fact.
And that is a fact. And so we're going to talk about that. Let me throw out my disclaimer here. If you happen to be in this audience and you are just perfectly satisfied with having people with Republican and R after their name and you think that's enough, I'm probably going to say a few things that'll make you angry. So if you want to be mad at me, you can be mad at me. Don't be mad at we the people of Longview. Don't be mad at Cindy and Mike for inviting me to speak. Because I can prove what we're saying here. With the rise of the Texas Liberty Tea Party movement over the last two legislative sessions, we've all had at least a common goal. Now, Tea Party groups, different 9/12 groups, Liberty groups, grassroots groups, whatever you want to call them across the state of Texas. Sometimes they don't like each other. We have our own little, what I call sandbox fights, which I stay out of. I tell the activists in Houston, if you don't like the people in Dallas-Fort Worth, too bad for you. And the other way around, because I'm going to work with everybody on our goals. And our goals are limited state government and a state where that Texas can be the leader across the nation whenever we know that it's so important to have Texas be strong. We want to make sure that our state's character, integrity, and our pro-liberty governance can lead a nation that is looking for answers. Who best to lead the United States than Texas? So how do we do this? How do we make Texas strong? Let's talk about that. We need to reduce dependency on federal dollars. We need to resist any increase in state debt. We need to get our state's fiscal house in order, uphold the rule of law at all times, reduce regulation, set much higher standards in ethics and transparency for elected officials, and resist unconstitutional federal overreach. Now, I can tell you on the test of Texas spends too much, Texas borrows too much, and Texas depends way too much on the federal government to balance the budget. We fail on all three counts, and I'm about to prove that to you. These are statistics that I pulled from the Legislative Budget Board, from the Texas Public Policy Foundation documents, and from the Tax Foundation. You can see here our dependency on federal funding. And by the way, okay, so what's wrong with being dependent on the federal government?
Strings attached.
See, it's got strings attached, and also, anybody here believe that we're gonna solve the debt crisis and the overspending in Washington anytime soon? Anytime soon. I don't either. So that makes Texas very vulnerable. Because look at this pattern here. We have a very serious pattern of dependency on the federal government. You can see here the biennium budgets beginning in 08 and 09. And look in 2010 and 2011 where our dependency on federal funds in our budget skyrocketed to $72.6 billion. You know what that was? Federal surplus. We had the federal dollars that were coming down to help bail out the states. And so the $72.6 billion almost approached 39% of our state budget revenue. So the stimulus, the federal stimulus there, if you look at the next biennium, the 82nd legislative session, I bet you've heard all of them say that they had dramatically cut spending, right? Well, guess what? What's the difference between the 82nd budget up there, the 81st and the 82nd? We didn't have the stimulus funds. They weren't going to get about $15 billion. That was a one-time infusion of federal Chinese monopoly money. And so, you know, so whenever they talk about cutting spending, they nibbled around the edges. But the most of the decrease in spending was because of the loss of federal stimulus funds. So then in the 82nd biennium budget, the legislature, that would be the 12-13, you see we went down to almost 32%, but look at last session, the 83rd legislative session, we skyrocketed up to $69 billion of federal funds balanced in our state budget. That is 35% of our state budget revenue. So what does this mean for us? Texas is 11th in the nation in dependency on federal funds. 11th in the nation. Well, you might say, well, you know, JoAnn, got a lot of people here in Texas paying federal taxes. Businesses and families. Sure we do. But you know what? We haven't been a donor state since 2008. That means that we take more out of the federal treasury now than all of us combined put in. The bottom line to that is our hand is on that shovel digging the debt hole just like everybody else. So what we need to do, a message to our state officials should be this. We need to have a conversation in Austin about what it would look like if Texas had to do without, I don't know, let's say a quarter of that. What about half of that? You could hear them screaming all the way up here from Austin, I guarantee you. The end of the world would be coming if they thought they were going to lose at even half of that. Well, friends, what happens if we lose all of it? Don't you think it would be appropriate for our elected officials to have a conversation about how Texas can wean itself off the federal trough? I think that is something that we need to do. Okay, so we see that we depend way too much on the federal government. What about our state debt? At the beginning of last session, I got these numbers from the Legislative Budget Board. And by the way, did you know when you ask your state senator or your state rep to get numbers from the Legislative Budget Board, that it starts a buzz in Austin? Well, why do they want that? You know, I thought we elected senators and state reps to be our representatives down there, and anytime they ask for anything, somebody ought to just give it to them. Don't ask them why. because they're supposed to be decision makers, right? So anyway, apparently it caused a great buzz down there to ask for this, but this is what I found out. Our state debt was almost $41 billion. That represents a 125% increase over the amount of state debt that was outstanding just 10 years ago in 2003. Because I asked for this back in 2013. 125% increase in state debt. Does that sound like a strong Texas to you? And the majority of the state debt is made up of, guess what? Transportation debt. We lead the nation in transportation debt. There was an audit done, and it's still on the Department of Transportation, TxDOT's website, and it shows that the debt path is absolutely unsustainable. And I bet you've probably had some state officials blow through here to tell you that we're at our debt limit. And oh golly gee, you guys need to help us out because you need to vote us some fresh revenue, right? I bet you heard that. I've heard that too. We'll get into that in a little bit. But the amount of debt that the state has, and that's not even considering the local debt. The state debt is more than that on the books of the U.S. Postal Service. That's pretty alarming, right? Guess what? If there's anything that the Tea Party movement was successful in doing last session, it was killing something called century bonds. Governor Perry and a very liberal senator, Democratic senator, Mr. Hinojosa, wanted to push forward a bill that would have put the state in a position to sell 100-year bonds to finance roads. I find that utterly ridiculous, and said so. So I called some of our Tea Party leaders from across the state, and I said, guys, we need to get together in the Capitol, and we need to have a press conference about this, and we need to tell them, no, we don't want this. And we need to make it very clear to them how seriously we don't want it. So in the Lieutenant Governor's press room, we had a press conference, and if you have a press conference there, everybody in the Capitol knows what we're saying. So we were happy to tell them that if they voted for this nonsense, century bonds to finance roads, that we would count that vote the same as we would count a vote to raise taxes. Because borrow and spend is just as bad as tax and spend, because borrow and spend is taxation on future generations. It's wrong. So there was a counter to that. Some of the people in the governor's office got the president of the Dallas Federal Reserve to come out with a statement saying, the Federal Reserve thinks this is a thing that Texas should do. To which we replied, you know what, the Federal Reserve has done such a bang-up great job with the national economy. No, thank you. We don't want it in Texas. And so I think my name was taken in vain quite a lot by some officials, but nevertheless, we killed it. So we don't have century bonds. Now, I just want to touch on this for just a little bit, because as we move toward the next legislative session, you're going to hear a lot more about this. Along with Texas Public Policy Foundation and Texans for Fiscal Responsibility, Americans for Prosperity of Texas, several groups, we are getting together and we are attacking the problem of local debt. The problem with local debt is that too many Republican primary voters do not show up in elections for local government, like school board elections and bond elections and city council elections and city bond elections. So meanwhile, the conservatives, while the conservatives sit at home, guess what's happened? your neighbors, Mary and let's call him George, have racked up debt to the point that Texas is the second highest in the nation in per person local debt. That is shameful, and it's also very dangerous. Look at this, it's almost $7,500 per person. We are behind New York, but guess what? We are ahead of California, Illinois, and Michigan. That's a dangerous spot, and it will damage, very, very badly damage future economies carrying this type of debt. So you'll hear more about that. And one of the ways that you'll hear more about that is a bill that actually Republicans killed last time. It didn't come out of committee. And this is a bill that would make local debt more transparent to citizens. For example, a school board, a city council, or a commissioner's court would have to tell you how much debt you already owe before they put more on the ballot. In fact, the ballot would have to give you more information, like how long is it going to be before you pay off that other debt, and make it more transparent. Well, I attended some of those hearings, and there were a couple of state representatives that said, you know, it just makes the ballot too complicated for our constituents, and they wouldn't understand it anyway. Well, I am happy to tell you that those two gentlemen were fired back during the March primary, and they won't be back. Is our state's fiscal house in order? That's another test to see if Texas is as strong as it should be. And I know I'm telling you things tonight that fly in the face of that thing, that pretty, wonderful, shiny object that I call the Texas fairy tale. It's that picture that's been painted by statewide officials as they go all over the country talking about Texas. I'm proud of Texas. We are absolutely a wonderful leader in job growth and development. But we also have this that they've got hidden under a rug somewhere. And we've got to bring it out in the light of day. We've got to stop this because it's going to ruin the opportunity for Texas to remain a leader and be the strongest leader that it can be. So let's talk for just a minute. Every time you see our leaders talk about how, well, you know, by golly, the federal government ought to take a page out of the playbook of Texas. We balance our budget. Well, sure we do. We have to. It's constitutionally mandated. The dirty little secret is there are a myriad of ways that one can balance a state budget. You can raise taxes. You can raise fees. You can institute new taxes and new fees. You can do my very personal favorite, and that is cut spending. You can also employ something called accounting gimmicks and deferrals. Let me give you an example of an accounting gimmick. During the 82nd legislative session, to balance the budget, they pushed forward into the next biennium by 1 day, into the next accounting period, a $4.3 billion payment to the foundation school program. So they didn't have to count it. So what happens is when they get back in the next legislative session, they go, oh my gosh, we've got so many bills we've got to pay here, and it's like it's a surprise to them. It should be no surprise, it's entirely predictable, and if you're around them for more than 15 minutes, friends, you can predict their behavior because they've been at it so long. You see, the spending over and above the increase of population growth and inflation, which is kind of our yardstick. We don't want the growth of government to be greater than the combined growth of inflation and population. But guess what? They've been doing it, and they've been doing it for a very long time. And here's what we did last session. If you compare session-to-session spending. Now, they don't like for you to do that because when you compare session-to-session spending, you are comparing all spending for all funds. Now, when I say all funds, I'm including federal funds, because where do they get those? Out of your federal pocket, right? They act as if that money just comes from, I don't know, the tooth fairy or something. They don't want to count that, but we count that. And when you compare session-to-session spending, the difference in the budget, the additional supplemental spending to pay those bills they didn't pay when they were there the last session, and dipping into your rainy day fund, guess what? They spent 26% more last session. 26% more. And they have the gall to run around and tell you that was a conservative budget. Anybody here thinks that fits the definition of a conservative budget? I don't. Now, this makes them really nuts. It does. And it really made them angry when the Wall Street Journal wrote an editorial about it, and they titled it, Texas Goes Sacramento. And the gist of it, Stephen Moore, y'all probably seen Stephen Moore, the economist on Fox News and Fox Business. Stephen said, what has happened in the state of Texas? Have they lost their minds? Because Republicans are in charge. And they spent 26% more. Well, you know, when we got to looking at it, and Chuck DeBoer with Texas Public Policy Foundation, y'all probably heard of Chuck. You should invite him to speak to you sometime. He's a former California assemblyman. And Chuck has a real appreciation for Texas, and he's working with all of us to try to make sure that we stop this leftward swerve toward California so that we don't keep making messes like this. But when we looked back into the history of California, do you know that there has never been a time in the history of the California Assembly that they ever spent 26% more comparing one legislative session to the other? So congratulations, Texas, you have out-Sacramento even California. So, was this 26%, and here's a chart, you can find this chart that lays it out section by section on the Texas Public Policy Foundation website. It's there, it's great. If I were you, I'd post it on my website. It will show you where we got that increase in spending. So was this just kind of a messy legislative session? Did they kind of have a little accident? Was this something they just kind of swerved off the highway to conservative budget policy? No. This is a pattern. If you look at all fund spending over the last 20 years by your state government, state spending has increased 310%, while the combined rate of inflation and population growth in that same 20-year period has grown about 139%. So you will see that we have been on a dangerous spending trajectory for quite some time. What covers that up? A diverse, booming economy covers that up. And a healthy rainy day fund covers that up. And also all of the accounting gimmicks and things that they do, it helps cover it up. That's why so many citizen activists are now going to Austin and working with statewide organizations to come back home to tell you guys the truth. Because it's important for us to get a handle on this, and we are across the state. Some of the most flagrant overspenders have either decided not to run for office because they knew they were going to get a primary challenge, or they've been beaten. We have, over the last 2 primaries, taken out a number of liberal Republicans. And I have to tell you this, the Democrats are not our problem in Austin right now.
That's right.
Right.
It's not Democrats. Our problem in Austin is the same problem that Ted Cruz and Louis Gohmert and real fiscal conservatives have in Washington. Is progressive liberal Republicans who never met a dollar they didn't want to spend. And they're in bed with big business. Big business and big government combined together, that unholy alliance is going for your wallet every chance they get. Okay? Now, so let's talk about what is it that the state should be spending money on anyway? The core constitutional functions of state government and nothing else. And we've gotten away from this. Public education, transportation, the justice system of criminal and civil courts, law enforcement, your state prison and correction system, management of natural resources, state emergency services, and because we took the first dollar of federal funds, Health and Human Services, Medicaid. Those are your core functions of state government. So when you hear people say, we don't have the money to secure a border, we spend an awful lot of money on things that are outside of the core functions of state government. Anybody ever heard of Formula One racing? F1 racing. I've talked about this all over the state. There used to be a statewide office holder who wanted to run for governor once upon a time. And I gave it away. She gave me her cell phone number, and we were having some pretty interesting conversations, and I applaud a lot of the things that she's done. But when I started talking about the fact that F1 racing is not a core constitutional function of state government, and that our state had no business pledging $250 million over a 10-year period to bring Formula One racing to Austin, our conversation stopped. Too bad. And a couple of weeks ago, guess what we found out about Formula One? That $250 million agreement, and they give it out like $25 million out of whack. About every November, December, they write the check. Now, these are two people who have mansions all over the world. Being an investment banker or a venture capitalist is not the business of state government. We shouldn't be doing that. So the $250 million agreement was based on nothing more than a handshake. There were no documents, there were no contracts, and you know how we found that out? Open records request. We want to see the document. So the folks asking for the document, they got nothing. So it was based on a handshake. I have to tell you that on the heels of the Cancer Research Institute, Cancer Prevention Research Institute fund that was approved by voters in the constitutional amendment. And then what we found out last week through the state audit of the Enterprise Fund, the Emerging Technology Fund, when you know that there are certain special interests in this state who never had to file a proposal to the Cancer Institute to be approved for funding, they never submitted themselves to scientific review, but they got millions of dollars. I have to tell you, that is not the way we should be running state government.
That's right.
And if the Democrats had done it, I'm just going to lay it out like it is, guys. If the Democrats had done it, there would be a shrieking out of Republicans so loud you could not hear yourself think. This needs to stop. We are doing everything we can to make sure those corporate welfare funds are drained and are never reinstituted, ever again. And I'm going to just take you through these very quickly. If you want to look at some of the spending spree examples, there was a 200% increase in the film.
Cannot hear you.
I'm sorry.
When you talk to the screen, that means.
I'm sorry. How's this? Is this better? All right. The 200% increase in the Film and Music Marketing Fund raised it to $95 million. Did you see film and music marketing on that list of core constitutional functions of state government? Okay, there was a $57 million allocation to the Emerging Technology Fund and $120 million to the Texas Enterprise Fund. Now, these are corporate welfare accounts. And I'm going to explain it to you in a minute. Everybody calls it economic development. On what principle of liberty can you rest that decision? What principle of liberty? If you don't like the federal government picking winners and losers in the national economy and giving funds to Solyndra and special interests, why is it okay for your state government to do it? See, if we're really free market people, we will let the free market work. Supply and demand work. Instead of handing out your tax dollars to companies with fantastic balance sheets. For example, Facebook and Caterpillar. If you want to know some of the companies who have gotten this funding, all you have to do is go to the governor's website and you'll see it posted there. So I'm just going to ask you, is there a principle of liberty on which you can say this is the right thing for our state government to do? If anybody, I've been all over the state and I've asked the question, nobody can cite one. And in fact, in the lieutenant governor's debate in Houston, where I was the debate master, that was one of my questions. And I heard the sound of crickets from all the candidates. And I said, well, the reason that you can't find a principle of liberty on which you can justify this spending is because there is none. So we need to stop it. Then if you look at the raises here.
Local governments do it too.
Yeah, oh yes, don't even get me started on local government. And by the way, did you know that your local government can do it? And they can do it in executive session behind closed doors and you know nothing about the agreement till it's done. And you can't do a thing about it. We're working on legislation this time with Texas Public Policy Foundation to bring that out of the back room and bring it out to the light of day so that your local elected officials have to tell you the kinds of economic development deals they are doing, how they're going to pay for it, how you're going to pay for it, and how it's going to be beneficial to your community. That at the very least, they should have to disclose all of this so that you have an opportunity to tell them whether you want them to make those kinds of deals or not. Then look at the raises here for just a few of the upper management down in Austin. How do you like a $73,000 raise all at one time, a 40% increase for the criminal justice director? How about a $35,000 raise to the Health and Human Services Commissioner who had only been on the job a few months? Now, you know what? I don't know. I mean, I've seen them in hearings. I don't know these people personally. They may be just fine, wonderful people. But I don't know where in the world in the private sector, other than some of the Wall Street fat cats, that can get these kinds of, raises. I mean, they usually have to have bonuses. They actually at least have to have produced a measurable result before they get a bonus. So, we have a system that's out of control down there, and it very much mirrors some of the very things that Washington does. Okay, all I want to say here about the water plan, because if you go around the state, and I was just out in San Angelo where it is dry. I told the folks in San Angelo when I made this presentation, I said, look, I understand that you need water, but you need a water plan that's going to be easily understood by the public. And what I have a problem with about the constitutional amendment that passed for the water plan is that we already had 39 different departments, agencies, and programs that manage natural resources. And this bill added up to 16 new employees. And in a two-party caucus meeting, when we asked them, were there not any of these other 38, 39 departments, agencies, and programs that you could have put this management of this water program in one of them? And the reply was, well, you know, Ms. Fleming, it's hard to do that. I said, well, you know, you said that last session when you had 101 Republicans in the House. Today, you have 95, and it's still too hard. Is it going to be easy when you get back down to 78 or 76? When is it going to be the right time to do this? See, because they just keep growing government down there. And what we're looking for in some of our new to be elected statewide officials, they at least have told us they agree we should have some government reform. So guess what? The elections are very important about who we elect. But the most important thing we do is hold them accountable for what they promised us. My friends, we have passed a time where you just elect people to office and wind them up and let them go and turn your back and mind your own business. That's why we've got the mess we've got. We've got to hold them accountable. And it's very hard. You will lose friends over it. I certainly have lost friends. Because it was my responsibility as Executive Director of Grassroots America to lead my board of directors to hold them accountable. And it's a tough job, but somebody's got to do it. This is not about electing the person that's the cutest, has the best hair, has a good sense of humor, you know, somebody you'd like to go fishing with, have a cup of coffee with, play cards with. It's not, you know, I hear too many people, they keep saying, well, you know, oh, Joe's just a nice guy. You know, I play golf with Joe. Well, you know, maybe if Joe would get off the golf course and do his job a little bit better, maybe he wouldn't spend so much of your money. So see, this is not about having a personality contest. You need to deeply vet your candidates, and then when you support them, hold them all. Every one